Hey, Millionaire! Musicians are idols to many people, and it's not hard to see why. They're talented, charming, and rich. Well, most of the time. If you watch this channel often, you'll already know that it doesn't matter how successful you are or how much cash you made thanks to your hit album and #1 single. It's still possible to lose it all. Many great musicians have gone broke, including these great R&B singers. But how did it happen? Let's take a closer look at how these super popular R&B musicians went broke. You'll be surprised by a few of the names on this list. Number 4. TLC. TLC is one of the biggest girl groups of all time. I'm saying second only to the Spice Girls. So how did every member of the band go bankrupt? The answer is pretty simple. We all need to start somewhere, and they signed a contract with a big record label when they were pretty new to the music business. It turns out that's always a mistake. It's even more of a mistake when you think the company is giving you loads of cash to produce your new album. They're not. See, when a record label offers musicians an advance to make an album, that's not their way of saying you have total creative freedom with their money. It's actually a loan. So, when a new band starts recording their songs and making million-dollar music videos, they might not realize they're going to have to pay all that back to their label. TLC didn't know that when they started. They had signed with LaFace and with the management company Pebetone, but every time they requested a fancy producer or a flashy music video, and every time the companies marketed their new singles, they were gathering debt. In the end, they were selling millions of records, but they were only making a few $1,000s off it. This kicked off a legal battle that lasted over a year, but their label argued in court that their contract was pretty standard in the music business. Lisa Left Eye Lopes later made a documentary for VH1 about these kinds of contracts. She proved that, on average, if a solo pop act signed a contract before they were famous, they would only earn about $2 or $3 for every $12 album they sold. Sounds unfair? Well, there's nothing anyone can do about it. Can you hit subscribe before another star goes bankrupt? You have 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Now keep watching. There are some shocking names coming up. Number 3. R. Kelly. While the TLC singers were clearly ripped off, R. Kelly has only himself to blame for going broke. He's one of the most recognizable names in R&B. In fact, he's so famous that even people who don't listen to R&B will know who he is. Over his career, he collected a giant fortune thanks to his platinum records, including his debut album, which went platinum a whopping 6 times. Overall, at his most wealthy, he was worth about $100 million. So where did it all go? Well, you've probably already guessed. He's got himself caught up in more crimes than we can count, and some of them are pretty terrible. His problem started in the year 2000 when several women came forward with sexual abuse allegations against Kelly. He lost tens of millions settling the lawsuits that followed. And it didn't stop there. Back in 1998, he stupidly recorded sex tapes of himself with a whole group of underage girls. Unsurprisingly, the tapes went missing. As soon as he realized this, Kelly spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to find the tapes and get them back. In 2013, he was evicted from his house in Chicago for not paying rent. And in 2018, that happened again. He just doesn't learn his lesson. This time, it was his properties in Atlanta that he lost. He owed $30,000 in rent, but his rent wasn't the only thing he was refusing to pay. The IRS has been on his tail since 2008. By 2016, they claimed he owed a whopping $1.6 million. That's a lot to bounce back from, especially when that's more cash than you're worth. And it wasn't about to stop. In 2019, the worst problem Kelly had ever faced came knocking. He was convicted of racketeering and, shockingly, sex trafficking. In case you haven't heard, his crimes were pretty shocking. He was found guilty of an organized operation, which was essentially kidnapping girls and shipping them out of the US for sex slavery or to be used in the production of child pornography. Yeah, it's pretty bad. That's not even the first time that R. Kelly had been accused of being involved in the creation of child porn. He's currently serving 30 years in prison for his infamous crimes. You won't be surprised to hear that he was attacked by another inmate. Even criminals hate people who abuse children. He was also ordered by the judge to pay a $100,000 fine for those taxes he owed. But the story doesn't end there. Back in 2009, he had gone through an expensive divorce, and with the new convictions, she showed up again. Now, she was ordering him to pay all the child support he owed her. She sued him for a whopping $160,000. Currently, he's worth minus digits. In other words, his net worth is about $2 million in debt. What do you think about R. Kelly's conviction? Let us know in the comments, and keep watching. The biggest R&B legends are still coming up. Number 2. Toni Braxton. Toni Braxton is known for her sultry 90s hits, but she hasn't quite succeeded financially. She's filed for bankruptcy not just once, but twice. Her financial troubles began right at the start of her career. She had just sold a whopping 15 million copies of her new album when she first filed for bankruptcy. I know what you're thinking. Her money problems can't have been that bad, but you're wrong. Court documents showed she was an eye-watering $50 million in debt. So how did that happen? How did the Grammy-winning star, who was at the top of the charts with her single "Unbreak My Heart," lost all that money? This was in 1998, after the release of her second album and her sold-out world tour. Well, there's a simple way to explain. Her record label was LaFace. Yeah, the same one TLC was signed to. See, Braxton's first two albums had gathered an impressive $170 million in sales, but LaFace decided that most of that cash was theirs. Thanks to Braxton's recording contract, she was only earning 33 cents for every album sale. She attempted to get her contract changed, with her lawyers arguing that superstars like her should be given more royalties and higher advances than less-known artists. Braxton was hoping her lawyers could get the label to end her contract, but they weren't successful, even after spending weeks negotiating. In the end, Braxton was forced to file for bankruptcy. She was legally not allowed to discuss why she filed for bankruptcy, but when she did an interview with Oprah, she did tell her that a big part of the problem was that she expected a large royalty check after her world tour ended. But instead of the hundreds of thousands she was probably expecting, she was sent a check for just less than $2,000. Sadly, that meant she was forced to auction off many of her private possessions to earn some money, including a baby grand piano, which she really loved, and her irreplaceable Grammy Awards. But despite how tragic that event was, it wouldn't be the last time she found herself in bankruptcy court. In 1999, LaFace finally settled, and Braxton was given an unknown amount of cash. She wasn't allowed to talk about any of what happened for the next 10 years, but she finally revealed everything in her memoir. According to her, she was only meant to be recording demo tracks that were not for release, but one of her demos she recorded sounded so good that the label released it anyway. Then, when it became an unexpected hit, they released a whole album of Braxton's music. But even though they were doing things with her songs that weren't included in her contract, they refused to change the terms. That explains why she was earning so little cash. The $2,000 royalty check also had an explanation. Like TLC, Braxton only learned that she had to pay back LaFace for all the money they spent producing her work after she saw that check. LaFace kept the rest of the cash she'd earned and gave her the $2,000 that was left over. She was now free from that money-obsessed label and could start a new chapter in her life. Thanks to the settlement her lawyers got out of LaFace, she was able to buy back a lot of her beloved possessions that she was forced to auction off. That must have felt like a weight off her shoulders. Her first album with her new label was super successful, so she knew her future in music was still secure. She did another Broadway tour and even started a family. Then, she even announced a Vegas residency. It was so popular that she was asked to stay for a few more years. Things were looking up pretty great for Braxton, until she collapsed on stage one night. She was rushed to the hospital, but it wasn't good news. She was definitely going to live, as we know, but she was sick. She was diagnosed with heart problems and lupus, which is a disease that affects the immune system. There's no cure. This was a huge problem for Braxton in more ways than one. She didn't want another record company to steal all her hard-earned cash like the last time, so she decided to fund her Vegas residency with her own money. That probably would have worked out pretty well if everything had gone to plan, but sadly, doctors were telling her she was way too sick to keep performing. She was forced to cancel the residency, but now she was in serious financial trouble. She now couldn't afford to pay all the people that had worked on the show with her. Remember, there are people like set designers, costume designers, and a whole crew involved with a show like that. Braxton would have paid them with the money she earned doing the show, but now that her show was canceled, she didn't have any way of paying them. Now, she was forced to file for bankruptcy for the second time in her career. Luckily, the story has a happy ending. She was finally able to settle the bankruptcy case in 2013, and she somehow got her career back on track despite her illness. And she now has a reality show, as you probably know, called Braxton Family Values. As you'd expect, she's earning more than enough money these days. And the R&B legend who took our #1 spot, Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye is one of the best-known names in the history of music, even after his death. So it might surprise you that this man who helped shape the sound of Motown and was hugely influential for other R&B artists was also broke for a long time. How could that be possible? Well, there were a few things that combined to create his serious money problems. One of those things was a growing drug habit. Back in the 70s, his cocaine habit was getting worse and worse, and it looks like he was definitely spending way too much cash to keep the drugs coming his way. Experts believe he used drugs as a way to deal with his depression. After all, he had a pretty hard life with an abusive father. His singing partner also died in 1970, which definitely sent Gaye into an emotional decline. But the drugs weren't his only problem. After 12 years of marriage to the sister of the founder of Motown Records, she filed for divorce. Gaye always said he loved her, but it also looks like he was cheating on her a lot. The divorce earned her a huge sum of money for the time, $600,000. On top of that, he owed a lot of back taxes too. He was in serious financial trouble, so he agreed to pay off his alimony by offering his ex-wife $300,000, which would come from the royalties from his next album. That sounded like a pretty good idea, but because Gaye knew his ex was getting most of the money, he didn't have a lot of motivation to write the album. He completed it at crazy speed. You won't be surprised to hear it was a flop. By now, Gaye's debts were piling up so high, it was almost impossible for him to get on top of them. Even with his next album becoming a hit after Sexual Healing topped the charts. People were loving his new music, but he wouldn't be around long enough to do anything about his debts. On the 1st of April 1984, Marvin Gaye was shot and killed by his own father with a gun he'd bought for him as a gift for his dad's personal protection. That was just one day before his 45th birthday. It was a tragedy that captured the attention of the entire world, with some people believing he'd provoked his father into killing him because he was so depressed. Either way, it was a pretty sad moment in music history, but people weren't as aware of how deeply in debt Gaye was when he died. He never filed for bankruptcy, maybe just because he didn't live long enough to force himself into that position. But when he died, he was a whopping $9.2 million in debt. Back in 1984, that was a mind-blowing amount of cash. $4.5 million of that was taxes that he never paid. His only asset worth anything was the intellectual property he owned on all his music. He never wrote a will, which meant his 3 children were given the rights to his music. In a way, it's nice that he was still able to leave them something. The rights were so valuable that even after money was deducted from their earnings to pay off his debt, his kids were still set for life. They earned even more when Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams were found guilty of plagiarizing Gaye's song "Got to Give It Up" on their hit Blurred Lines. Gaye's kids earned $5.3 million as a result. So even though their dad died broke, it looks like they're going to be rich for the rest of their lives. Did you like this video? Then you wouldn't want to miss this one.